from engaging in their work as well as other everyday activities. So this is pretty interesting. Back pain accounts for more than 264 million lost workdays in 1 year. And that's 2 workdays for every full-time worker in the country. And experts estimate that up to 80% of the population will experience back pain at some time in their lives. In most cases of back pain, they're mechanical and they're non-organic. And so that means that these people that come to you, they've actually done something, a poor functionality in their everyday movement that has created these imbalances or pain. And then the low back pain costs Americans at least $50 billion, that's B, in healthcare costs each year. And also that's it added in lost wages and decreased productivity. And that figure easily rises to more than $100 billion when you factor in lost wages. So, you know, the stats here are just to drive the point home that people are experiencing back pain and they may be coming to you to fix that. Help me, please help me, because a lot of times these people are released from their physical therapist and they don't know where to go. So the take home for the stats is nearly 65 million Americans report a recent episode of back pain. And some 16 million adults, and that's 8% of all adults, experience persistent or chronic back pain. And it's always associated with just everyday activities. And surprisingly enough, back pain is the 6th most costly condition in the United States. So you as a trainer or an instructor are an integral part of someone's healing, and you have the solution for that. So that brings us to the question, well, what is the core? You know, I've got a lot of people that come to me and they want, I need you to help me with my core. I have a weak core. So what does that mean? So is this the core? And let me tell you, this person right here, this picture is taken because they want you to look at their hands, right? Look at the work that they did because of their hands, but I didn't look at the hands. I went right immediately to the abs. So is this the core? Ask yourself, is this it? We have a lot of clients that come to us and say, I need a 6-pack, make me look like this, but is this really the core? Is this the core? So if I were to eliminate my arms and my legs and I'm just left with the centerpiece right here, is this the core? Or can we get down deep and dirty and talk about, is this the core, right? So everybody has their own definition, their own perception of what their core is. But this is a really good general idea if you're working with your people and they really want to know what their core is. So it's really your trunk, and it works in 3D. So it's all the little muscles that make up your center or your trunk. We actually have about 29 muscles that make up the core. So it's not just the abs. And as you as a health and fitness professional, you know that it's not just the abs. And when we say abs, those pretty 6-pack abs, we're really talking about specifically the rectus abdominis. So right here, you can see that it's your rectus abdominis, your external internal obliques, your transverse abdominis, and your transverse abdominis, I always call that your anatomical girdle. Those are the deep within muscles that really protect the spine. They wrap around the spine and give it stability. Your psoas, your iliopsoas, those are also part of your core. Quadratus lumborum, your iliacus, the gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, gluteus minimus. You know, a lot of people don't realize that there are 2 other glutes besides the gluteus maximus. And then you have your erector spinae, which is super important. We work a lot of the erector spinae when we're doing Pilates especially. So when we're working the core, we want to work 3D. We want to work the front, we want to work the back, and we want to work the sides. So let's talk about the core foundations. Now that we know the core structure, the core foundations. So when you're working with your client and they come to you and they want to work the core, our goal as a trainer should be, we want to progress clients through functional abilities. So we're really training movement and not muscles when it comes to the core. Your people really want to function better. And, you know, they understand that, oh, I've got back pain and I really want to develop my core. I need to build core strength. Or they've been in chiropractic care for a long time and their insurance has run out, and insurance is not going to cover chiropractic care anymore. So where do they go? So they're coming to you because they want to continue to develop their core strength. So we're training functional abilities, flexibility, core stabilization, balance, strength, power, and cardiorespiratory endurance. So all of that makes up your core foundation. So when we look at the core, we're really talking about the function of the spine. And when you train your core, you want to be able to stabilize in all planes of motion. In other words, you want to be able to stabilize your spine in all planes of motion. So what does that mean? So your spine can flex and extend in sagittal plane. Your spine can laterally flex in frontal plane. And then we can also rotate the spine through transverse plane. So those are the 3 planes of movement, the main ones. And then we can combine all of those planes and we can do several movements across multiple planes. But what's really interesting is that when we're looking at flexing and extending in sagittal plane, you know, back in the old days, if you were doing your presidential sit-up test back in elementary school and maybe even in high school when you were doing that test, remember how you had somebody sit on your feet and you had to flex all the way up, do a full sit-up all the way up and all the way down? Well, really, your abdominal muscles or your rectus abdominis is really responsible for so much of that action, and really about 30% for flexion is your rectus abdominis. And then the rest of the way, you've got other muscles that are compensating, like your psoas. And so, which is really interesting when you're training your people, it's really good to understand your spine, and using specific muscles can only flex about 30% using the rectus abdominis, and then the rest of the way is everything else. Look at rotating the spine. You can really only rotate or twist, for lack of better terms, twist your spine in that transverse plane about 15%. So if you're doing, for an example, if you're doing a seated twist in Pilates, you're not going to be able to twist all the way to the side or even all the way turning back like an owl turns its head all the way around. Basically, you can only safely twist at the spine 15%, and then beyond that is everything else. So just keep that in mind. When we're working the core, we really want to look at the function of the spine. And I love, because I do come from a Pilates background, Joseph Pilates said that all motion originates from the center and then proceeds to the extremities. That always sticks in my mind, even though I'm not always training in Pilates. I'm not always doing mat Pilates or even apparatus Pilates. I have personal training clients that are non-Pilates people. And that just always sticks in my mind, though, because it's so important to remember that if you don't have your core set right, then everything else, you can muscle through it, but it may not be proper. So let's just take a look at that. Your core muscles function to keep your spine stable. Or in other words, we want to resist movement and not cause movement. When we're talking about deep within core muscles, the core foundation, the purpose of deep within proximal core stability is to resist movement. So that's, you know, really interesting when you think about that. We want a healthy spine. So you can see the spine structure here. We've got vertebra from each section of the spine, and we know that the top part of the spine is the cervical vertebrae, and then we have the middle of the spine, which is the thoracic vertebrae, and then we have the lumbar vertebrae down below. So we got the top is cervical, the middle is thoracic, and the bottom is lumbar when you're looking at the spine. So when you're looking at these pieces of the vertebrae, you notice that the top is a little smaller than the one in the middle, and then the one in the middle is a little bit smaller than the one at the bottom. So that just leads us to believe that our spine is just like a structure, like a building structure. And we want to have a strong foundation. We want to have a strong bottom of that spine. So that is why your lumbar vertebra is larger than your thoracic and your cervical. We have very little movement in the lumbar vertebra. And so it's designed that way, little movement. But the thoracic vertebrae is designed to move. It's designed to flex, extend, lateral flex, side to side, and to even twist. And then you also have your cervical vertebrae. It does move, but it also wants to provide a little bit of stability. But definitely your lumbar vertebrae is designed to be bigger and stronger and a big foundation. So we want to stabilize those muscles around the lumbar vertebrae. So when you have your clients come to you, and let's just say you're doing one-on-one training, you definitely want to assess their posture. And so predictable patterns of muscle imbalance where some muscles become shortened or overactive and others become lengthened or underactive can be identified through a static postural assessment. And Vladimir Janda, who was a Czech neurologist, he was the one who came up with this type of assessment. And we're going to go into that in just a second. But you can easily eyeball your client. You just line them up and you want to eyeball your client. You want to look at them from the front, from behind, and at the side. And you just want to take a look at their posture. So first you want to start at their feet. Look at their feet and their ankles. They want to be pointed straight ahead, and they want to be about shoulder width apart, or that's actually supposed to be hip, not hit. They want to be about hip or shoulder width apart. And then you want to look at your client and they want to have their knees in alignment with the second and third toe. And then when you're looking at the side, you want to make sure that their hips are neutral. So you're really looking at the lumbo-pelvic hip complex. So you want to look at that and make sure that they're neutral. Also, when you're looking at them directly straight on, are their shoulders neutral? Are they level straight across? So if you're looking at them straight on, is one higher than the other, or are they even? If you're looking at them from the side, how does their head line up with their shoulders? How does their cervical spine line up with their shoulders? So is their head forward? Is their head back? Are their shoulders rounded? So really a simple postural assessment is really good to see, we've got some misalignments here. Is it coming from their core? More than likely it is, unless they've had some sort of accident, some structural accident. They could possibly have scoliosis. So all of these things need to be considered. So they could have an accident, some structural damage. They could have scoliosis that you might want to look at. But then also it could be just poor movement on a day-to-day basis. So here's a simple little form that you can use when you're assessing your clients. Again, it's just looking at them. Remember your scope of practice as a personal trainer. When you're working with a client one-on-one, you are not a doctor, so you are not going to diagnose if someone has scoliosis or has any deviations. You're not going to diagnose. But what it will do is it will enlighten you to maybe some exercises that you can do with your client that will help them. And if they've been released by their doctor, let's say they've been doing chiropractic care or physical therapy and they've been released and they just need some really good exercises to perform, that's when you're going to come into play. So we talked about Vladimir Janda, and he came up with the crossed syndrome. So he came up with upper cross syndrome, lower cross syndrome, and pronation distortion syndrome. So we're just going to cover those real quickly, because when you're doing a postural assessment, these are some of the things that you're going to look for. So we have the upper cross syndrome. Here's a really good example how it would look when you're looking from the side at your client. So notice over to the right side that their upper traps and their levator scapula is very tight, but the neck and the deep neck flexors, they're very weak. So you can see them at the top of that little X right there. And then at the bottom, they have weak lower traps and serratus anterior, and they're tight in their pecs. So you can notice that that's where the cross comes into play. That's where the name upper cross syndrome comes into play. We can also, we're very used to, as personal trainers, calling this the kyphotic curve. So if someone has rounded shoulders, very weak upper back muscles, very tight pecs, that's where this comes into play. But what's really cool is that you can understand that when your people come to you and they're complaining about rotator cuff impingements or shoulder instability, biceps tendonitis, thoracic outlet syndrome, or even headaches, you might want to consider start with the upper cross syndrome, and that will enlighten you to, okay, we need to strengthen the upper back muscles. We need to stretch the pec muscles. So these are just some really aha moments for a trainer to really understand this and go, okay, now I know what we need to straighten you out. Then looking at the lower cross syndrome, if you look over here to the left, you notice that they've got just a small little curvature down to just like a regular spine. So their posture is really good. But when you look at the right diagram or person image, you've got the lower cross syndrome. So they've got a very tight erector spinae at the top. And then over to the right, they've got weak abdominals. Then if you go down to the bottom left, they've got weak glutes, but they have tight hip flexors. So that makes up the cross, the lower cross syndrome. So some common injuries for this individual, they have hamstring strains, or they have anterior knee pain or low back. So, or low back pain. So we know when our clients are coming to us and they're complaining about these types of issues in their body, then that light bulb can go off as a trainer and go, okay, they must have a lower cross syndrome. If their back is tight and their hip flexors are tight and their glutes are weak and their abs are weak, well, guess what? They might have lower cross syndrome, and we know how to correct that. So we can strengthen their abdominals. We need to flex their back or work on their erector spinae and get some more mobility in the erector spinae. So that is a really good enlightenment tool. Then you have what's called pronation distortion syndrome. And this is also known as geno valgus, or knee knocked, or knocked knees. So if somebody comes to you and they're complaining about plantar fasciitis, posterior tibialis tendonitis, or knee pain or low back pain, you know, when you're looking at them straight on or even from behind, you can see, they're a little knocked kneed there, or they've got a little issue with, it's also called geno valgus, or poor ankle flexibility. That could also be an issue. So do they pronate more than what they should? So all of this, you know, comes into a structural, probably just dysfunction in their mobility. And so if we can kind of correct that, correct their dysfunction and how they move, then they will start to develop that muscular strength around those joints, and maybe they can start moving a little bit better with the exercises that you will provide. So once you do your postural assessment, it's just, you know, you're looking at them and you're just making notes on your sheet going, their right shoulder is higher than your left shoulder. Their right hip is higher than the left. Or, you know, I'm looking at them from the side, their head juts forward or their shoulders are rounded. So these are just some things to look at, and then you're going to make little notes. And then you can do a quick little movement assessment to see how well do they move. The most common movement assessment that we can do is an overhead squat assessment. And I've listed here a few more assessments that you can look at, and we can look those up, and you can research how to perform those assessments. But the movement assessment right here, the overhead squat assessment, so right here at the top, that is proper movement, proper mobility. They're in a straight diagonal line from their fingertips, their shoulders, their hips. So it's a nice diagonal line, and their knees are tracking right over their second and their third toe. So the knees are not shooting over the toes, and the knees are in nice alignment. And if you're looking over at the anterior side, their hips, their knees are all in alignment with their toes. So their knees are not dipping in, or their knees are not rolling out. They're tracking right over the ankles. And then if you looked at your client from behind in the posterior, their hips are level when they squat down. They have a nice vertical line from their head right in between their shoulder blades to their tailbone to the floor. And then you're going to look at their calves and their ankles, and then you notice that they're not shifting inward or outward. They're not having a major pronation or supination happening with the feet. So if there are some dysfunction in the movement, then you can definitely see on the left-hand demonstration here, if you're looking at the anterior position, you can see if they've got knocked knees, or if their knees are separating out wide. If you're looking at the side view, you can see how this person has a sway back, or they have a rounded back, or if they're dipped way over. It's almost like her back is parallel to the floor. So you can see those different variations of how you might see this in one of your clients. And then looking at the posterior view, you can see that the ankles are rolling in or rolling out. The hip is higher on the left than on the right. So this is just an example of what to look for when you are doing a movement assessment. So this is the overhead squat assessment. Another one that I use a lot is also a quadruped position. And basically, I don't even have to do a bird dog, right? If you guys know what a bird dog position is, you got one right arm out, your opposing left leg is back while you're balancing on your left knee, and did I say that right? I always get that mixed up too. All right, so your right arm is out, your left leg is out, and you're balancing on your right knee and your left hand. There you go. Opposite arm, opposite leg. So that's a bird dog. But I don't even have to do that to see if I've got some imbalances happening. I could literally just put somebody in a quadruped position where the hands are underneath the shoulders, the knees are underneath the hips, the toes are tucked back, and they're just literally lifting their knees off the floor about an inch. And I'm just seeing, are they strong enough to be able to withstand that, to hold that, and pull their belly up away from the floor? So, that's just another little quick assessment that you can do with your clients to see what's up. All right, now when we talk about the core, what I love about working the core is that you want to progress them from core stability through core strength and then through core power. It's like a baby learning how to walk. And then once they get to the position where they're walking, then you're chasing after your baby because they're running. Okay, so when you have a baby, they learn how to roll over. Then they learn how to sit up. And then they learn how to crawl. And then they learn how to cruise. And then they learn how to walk. And then all of a sudden they're off and running, you're chasing after them, right? Same thing with your core. You want to begin with core stability type movements. And you want to maintain neutral spine throughout the movement. So you have your ASIS and your PSIS, that's your anterior sciatic issue, or your iliac psoas, and your posterior iliac psoas. So you want to make sure that that remains neutral. Now, when you're thinking about core stability, all you want to do is just engage your abdominal muscles. In other words, pull your belly button down towards your spine. And when you're activating your deep within core muscles, you're not bracing your core massively, right? You're not just crunching in. It's just a nice activation. And you should be able to continue to breathe naturally. I know in Pilates, we really focus on inhaling, expanding the rib cage, exhaling, pulling the rib cage in and down. So we're not focusing on belly breaths. We're focusing on breathing in through the rib cage and then filling up the lungs with breath. And you're just activating the core. So typically when you're doing core stability type exercises, it's a very light load. We're not doing massive weights. So like an old school type of exercise would be, you've got, let's say you have a cable machine and you've got the rope at the end of the cable, and then you put the rope at the back of your head and you're doing a million crunches with like 50 pounds, right? So we're definitely not working on core stability when you're adding a lot of weight. So you want to do light loads, and some really good exercises to work on core stability is plank. That's like the best exercise, just a plank. You can do a high plank like this gal is doing right here, or you can do a low plank where you're down on your forearms. So you can do that modification. And really, it's just a matter of how are your shoulders feeling today? How are your wrists feeling today? If an individual is having a hard time with the wrists that day, then bring them down to the forearms. So that's just a nice little variation, but it's all about core stability planking. You've also got a side plank. Right there, this gal, she's on her forearm. But notice how she's in a straight diagonal position, right? So she's not sinking down in her hips. She doesn't have her hips piked up to the side. She's got a nice diagonal line through her body. Now, if she needed to modify, she can always drop her knee down, one knee down or both knees down until she's strong enough to come up to this position. Another good exercise for core stability is on your belly doing a prone cobra. And this essentially, she's got a little bit of spine extension here, but normally we don't want to do a full cobra here where we have a huge spinal extension or a sway back here. So she's lifting through her erector spinae, and she's keeping her feet down on the floor so she's not activating her hamstrings or her glutes. So anytime we're working our core and we're working on core stability exercises, we have to be careful that we're not compensating with other muscles like the glutes and the hamstrings here. Then we also have the floor bridge, and we want to maintain our hips in neutral. This is another great exercise where we can lift up into a bridge and pull the belly button down towards the spine. And again, look at her form. She's got a nice straight line from her knees to her hips to her shoulders, and her hips are not caving down and her hips are not shooting all the way up to the ceiling above her head. It's in a nice diagonal line. So these are some really good examples of core stability. Then once we feel like our clients are ready to move on, that they can, these are great, you know, back here, these were great exercises for the core stability to monitor. Can they do these efficiently, or can they do these proficiently? And if you feel like, yes, they're super strong in this core stability, now let's take them on and let's do some core strength exercises. So this does require movement of the spine, and typically through larger ranges of motion, right? So we want to take them through movement. And if you remember from your personal training days or your educational days, we've got an isotonic muscle contraction, we've got an isometric muscle contraction, and we've got an isokinetic muscle contraction. So really we're talking about an isotonic muscle contraction where you have a concentric phase and an eccentric phase of that isotonic muscle contraction. So working through large ranges of motion while we're developing core strength. So some of these movements could include flexion, extension, lateral flexion, rotation, and a combination of those joints. Remember how we talked about this is the foundation of our core. We've already kind of talked about this when we're talking about planes of motion. So these are also movements that we're going to perform when we're developing core strength. So We have our lovely example down here at the bottom. She is performing crunches, and notice how she is not all the way up in a full-blown sit-up, right, where she's all the way on her sits bones. She is literally just crunching up about 30 degrees, and then she's going to lower back down. So that you can do crunches for core strength, but just understand what the purpose is of the movement that you're doing it. So we've got our crunches. Then we are going to do back extensions. And this gentleman here, right down in the bottom middle picture here, back extensions, he's got really good form. So he starts, actually we usually start our clients down at the bottom, the right-hand side, and then they lift up and only come, they don't go far back, they don't go past hyperextension, they just perform extension, right? So we want to think about the erector spinae, those back muscles that run up and down the spine. If we really want to work the back extensors or the erector spinae, this is as far back as what we want to go. And you can engage your glutes and your hamstrings to protect your back if your client has really weak back muscles. But then again, we would have already developed that with our core stability before we gone on to core strength, right? So when you're doing back extensions on the apparatus, you literally just want to lift up to where you've got a nice diagonal line with your head, neck, shoulders, hips, and knees. Then we have trunk rotations. This is a great example of trunk rotations. So normally when people want to work on their obliques, they'll pick up a medicine ball, they'll balance on their tailbone, and they'll do Russian twists side to side. And there are some people that are super strong to be able to do that, but really remember, our lumbar spine is only designed to move about 15%, right? So think about that anytime you're doing your exercises, you're doing rotations through, for example, like a Russian twist. This is a great example to develop core strength. You have an individual laying down on your back. You can anchor your shoulders with your arms out like a T. Start with your legs in the center, and ideally you want to start with your feet or your knees in tabletop. So in tabletop, your knees are directly over your hips and your feet are in line with your knees. Automatically, you're turning on your abdominal muscles, your core muscles when you have your legs in tabletop. Now, this guy here that's demonstrating, his legs are kind of up in the air, and that may put a little bit too much pressure on your back. So ideally you want to bend your knees, keep your knees in tabletop, and then you can slowly drop your knees to the side, don't touch the floor, and then you're going to bring your knees to the opposite side. These are three great examples of how to go from core stability to core strength. Then once you have developed core strength, then you can move on to core power. So some of your clients never get out of core strength and they'll be there forever, which is totally fine. But when you move on to core power, usually we have usually we use a medicine ball. Not always, but a medicine ball is a great example. And we're really incorporating, focusing on the movement's rate of force, right? So when you're looking at this gal, what she's doing is she's doing the medicine ball slam. So she picks up a heavy enough ball. She's already developed her core stability, her core strength, and now we're really going to put some power behind it. So she comes up on her toes with that ball overhead, and then she slams it down on the ground and then squats down, picks up the ball, lifts it up over the head again, and then slams it back down. So this is a great example of a medicine ball slam. Now here are some other examples like the soccer throw. The soccer throw is probably more of a precursor to the medicine ball slam because you don't have to squat all the way down. It looks very similar to the medicine ball slam, but you're just lifting the ball up over your head and throwing it down on the ground. So if you've ever played soccer, and believe it or not, I played soccer all through elementary school, high school, and college. So if you ever see people doing that throw going overhead from the sideline, the soccer throw. They get called out if it goes over to the side, either side, or their foot goes a little weird. So you have to have those arms straight over take that ball straight over the head and forward, not even off to the side. So that's the soccer throw. And then overhead crunch throw, that's always a fun one, especially if you're doing a small group. Personal training, and even couples training. Now, this could get a little dangerous with your husbands and wives if they're training together. I actually had a husband and wife couple training session, and they would do this, and so they're throwing the medicine ball at each other. So don't catch them on a bad day or they'll have some teeth knocked out. But anyway, overhead crunch throw, I had them literally sitting on exercise balls, and they were crunching and throwing the ball overhead to each other. It's a fun exercise to do. Once again, core stability, core strength has already been established. And then you also have rotation chest pass. So that, in other words, you are standing to the side of a wall and you're throwing up against the wall, like you're rotating and throwing up against the wall, or you're doing a partner and you are rotating and you're passing the ball side to side. So just another example of a core power move. So 3 examples of how you're going to move your people from core stability, core strength, and then core power. So raise your hand. I can't see you, but raise your hand digitally if you had your clients ask you these questions, right? And maybe you can answer these questions if you're new to the industry and you're just learning about the core and what it all means. I'm sure you've asked this question yourself, or you've been in the industry for a while and you still have people coming to you asking these questions. Do I have upper and lower abs, right? So ask yourself that question. Do you have upper and lower abs? Well, the answer is yes, you do have an upper part of your abs and a lower part of your abs, but they're all connected. They're all connected together. I can't just work my upper abs without working my lower abs. What is really interesting, but then people will say, well, I only feel this in the top portion of my abs, or I only feel this in the lower portion of my abs. So they get it. They've got an upper and a lower. They feel that, but really what they're feeling is where the motion is originating. So if you're doing abdominal crunches and you're lifting up that 30%, that motion is originating from above. So they're going to feel it more towards the upper part of the abs. Now, if they have their legs lifted up and they're lifting their legs up and maybe the hips up a little bit, and lowering down, or if they're doing leg lifts, lowering the legs down and lifting the legs up, they're going to feel that more towards the lower portion of the abs. But that doesn't mean that our rectus abdominis muscles are cut in half and we got a top half and a bottom half, okay? So it's all one unit. Then you have clients that always want to know, can I get a six-pack? Okay, so once again, when we are training the core, we're training for movement and we're not training muscles, right? Of course you could get a six-pack, but you're going to have to take a look at your diet first, because you can have amazing six-pack under all that fat that you've got in your body. Now, I would never, number one, I would never say that to a client, and I would never say that to any of y'all, right? Because we don't have that. So a six-pack is, you really have to take a look at your diet, because your muscles will show up once you reduce the body fat. And we can never spot train. It's all about combining your movement with your diet. And then people want to know, when should I perform core work? Let's just say you've got a whole routine planned out for the day. Maybe you're doing legs, maybe you're doing upper body, maybe you're you're not doing functional work and not moving the whole body as one unit. Maybe you are dissecting the body into different muscle groups. So when should you do core work? Well, I always recommend doing core work before you do anything else. But that's to say if you're not working to exhaustion, because you can work your core to exhaustion and then it does need to rest. I mean, if that's all you're focusing on is the core, that's great. And so then people want to know, can I do abs every day? People will still say, yes, you can do abs every day. And abs are in quotes there because abs means so many different things, right? So if you are doing a core day and you are exhausting the core muscles, then you have to treat those muscles just like any other muscle group and give them a rest day. So treat them just like any other muscles and let them recover. So hopefully you've gotten some good answers on that. All right, but I do want to focus, I do want to address this before I move on, because I know the latter part, that's what everybody wants to know. How can I make money at this? And yeah, it's so funny because just this morning before I came on to do the webinar, and I hope none of y'all have to go see an oral surgeon, but I just went for a follow-up to the oral surgeon, and this guy doesn't know me. I've seen him, although we do have an intimate relationship he has with my mouth. And you know, I've met him twice, you know, once to do the work and once to do the follow-up, right? So I'm just sitting in the chair and, you know, he's got so many other different patients that he needs to see and talk to. But this guy, this doctor was such a great, had such great bedside manner, right? So he came to me and all I was doing was just sitting in the chair, and I didn't say a word to, he doesn't know me. He doesn't know what I do for a living. And he asked me, well, what do you do for exercise? And in my head, I was like, well, that's a funny question to ask somebody you have no idea about, right? What do you do for fitness? And I was like, oh, well, I run and I do lift weights and I do Pilates. And he's like, oh, yeah. And it came out that I actually teach Pilates. And then, but when I said Pilates, he was like, oh, and this was before he even knew I was an instructor. He said, oh, yeah, Pilates, that is so important. Your core is so important. And then he went on to teach me about how important your core is. I mean, your flexibility, your balance. It's just so important. And he just went on and on and on about how back in the day, he's an older gentleman, back in the day, all anybody wanted to talk about was football, where he came from, a football background. And, you know, what are y'all doing that core stuff for, those ab stuff for? That's just, that looks silly. Let's just go work out, right? So that was the mindset. But he is now of a specific age, and he's like, it's so important to do core work. And then it eventually came out where I teach Pilates, and I'm also a trainer. And then before he left, he said, I need to get your card. I'm going to tell my wife about what you do, and she needs to hook up with you. Literally, that was a 5-minute conversation that I had. And this guy was asking for my card. I want to get you hooked up with my wife. And she would love to do this. So that brings me to my next bit of information. The way that you position yourself as a trainer could be capitalizing on what people need. Now, this is a good capitalization. This is not a bad opportunistic idea. This is really good. You could be really helping a lot of people, right? So we said 65 million people at one point in time, or even 80 million people at one time, have felt some sort of back issue, and they're coming to you because they want to develop their core. I get that all the time. I need help to develop my core. So you, because you have the education, you have the background, capitalize on that. Put your foot forward that I am a core specialist. And so people will be just knocking down your door to get that. So the first thing you want to do is you want to get good education. So you want to make sure that you get a certification in functional movement or core stability, whatever the case may be, whatever certification, whatever it's titled. You definitely want to get the education behind that. You definitely want to get your CECs, continuing education credits. If you are already a group exercise instructor, if you're already a personal trainer, tons of information on your core, and you can get your CECs through that. Then, how do I get paid? How do I structure all of this? Well, there are 3 ways that you can do it. You can do one-on-one training, and a lot of people are into that. You can charge per session, and I recommend 30 minutes. With one-on-one training, 30 minutes, and you can charge per session. You can also design a package plan for people, or even go into a monthly plan. But definitely you can do one-on-one training and charge, because people will pay you for this. They're really eager and chomping at the bit to get your expertise. You can also go into semi-private training, where you can include 2 to 4 clients, and I would recommend about 45 minutes for 2 to 4 clients, because you can really spend some extra time with them. And then if you're going to do a group fitness class, which you can do a core group fitness class, and that is about 5 or more students. And I would definitely allot 60 minutes for that, so that you can tend to each client and really get with them and understand their dysfunctions or their mismovements, and then help them to correct and move in the right direction. Again, when you're doing group fitness classes, you can either charge per class, you can offer a discount for a class package, or you can even offer a discount for monthly unlimited. You know, how much do you charge? That's another question. You know, how much would you charge for this? Well, obviously you're going to charge a premium for one-on-one training, and then make it a little less for semi-private training, and then make it even less than that for group fitness. And it just depends on where you are in the country, and just do a little market research and see what other trainers are charging in the area for one-on-one, semi-private, and group fitness classes. You don't want to price yourself out where you're too expensive, but you don't want to lowball either. So you want to just create that value, and don't short sell yourself either. You are valuable. You want to bring that to the table. And like I said, people want your expertise, and they will pay that. So a couple of ways you can do that. You can be either a W-2 employee through a gym or a studio, which they have the insurance for you, they have you covered, and they pay you through a W-2, or you can become independent or be a 1099. In other words, what does that mean? So a studio, let's just say a studio doesn't want to hire you as a W-2 employee. The people pay the studio the fees for either one-on-one, semi-private, or group fitness classes. They'll pay the studio, and then you and the studio negotiate, you know, what your fee is going to be based out of that, and then they will pay you through the studio. However, and then they'll send you a 1099 when it comes tax time. But if you are a 1099, more than likely you are not covered under their insurance policy. So you want to make sure that you are covered, you as the independent contractor, or you're the owner of your own business. Make sure you're covered with liability insurance. And we also partner with some great partners here at FitTour. And then you always want to make sure that you have a liability waiver and informed consent. So if you are on your own, either as a 1099 independent or a business owner, make sure you are covering yourself, protect yourself. Then just to talk a little bit about specialization. So when you specialize, when you are the core queen or the core king, and everybody knows you as the core person to go to, you can really specialize in this area. Develop some good relationships with physical therapists, because once the clients are released from either their chiropractor or their physical therapist, they have nowhere to go. Their insurance is not going to cover that anymore. So develop good relationships with the physical therapist and the chiropractor, because then they want to refer their people to you. And then vice versa. Your clients, if they just so happen to get injured, or if they need to be adjusted, develop those relationships so that way you can refer people to them as well. Also, your active agers. Now, let me tell you, people don't like being called active agers. I'll tell you that right now. They don't want to be reminded how old they are. So they don't have to be active agers, just people of a certain age, because they're out there. let me tell you, I work with these people. They're out there playing tennis. They're out there playing pickleball. They're golfing. They need this core training. We have a lot of horse people here in Georgia. And so they really want to work on their core. So go to those places and tell them I'm the core specialist here. You can work with athletes as well. So your younger people, your college students, your high school athletes, or your club athletes, and go to them and just say, I specialize in core training. They need this for their sport. And I already talked about the gym and the studio and all that. So that's pretty much it with the specialization, and also the fee structuring and how much should I charge. And I wanted to give you some good information on you know, what is the core, the structure, and how do you progress your people. But I do want to say that we at Fit Tour, we do have a certification. It's a core and functional fitness certification. So I highly recommend that you check that out. And also, we have an amazing special going on right now. If you're on our email distribution list, hopefully you got the email to say that we have a special going on in our suspension fitness programming, and I believe it's only like $39.99. So guys, check that out, because your core is all involved in your suspension fitness. So with that being said, you guys, I thank you so much for spending this past hour with me. Hopefully you got some really good nuggets that you can take with you. You can apply them to your already clients that you're working with. And maybe hopefully you got some inspiration that can open up a whole new avenue for you, maybe something that you haven't thought about, and you know what foot to lead with. But I just want to congratulate you for being in the best industry in the world, and we need you out there. Continue to do what you're doing. And with that, Melissa, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Caroline. I have added in the chat to everybody the link that will take you to our promo for today, which is the $39.99 primary or advanced suspension fitness certifications. And like Caroline, I think that suspension fitness is very valuable, especially for core training, and it works wonderfully for everybody. That's one of the best parts about suspension fitness. So I would look that up. I recommend it. I'm excited to be teaching suspension fitness this fall myself. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. Bye.